So Jed and Shari have joined me today. We decided to have a conversation about what was going on in the recent conversation that John Vervaeke and Paul Vanderklay had, where the title of the video was Non-Theism and Classical Theism, God as Agent in Arena with John Vervaeke. And I think that they started to turn the ship toward landing in Grail Country and in our neck of the woods, because there is like a definite signs of a sociological turn in this conversation, and and there's a struggling with the idea of person that is starting to understand this theological concept of person as irreducible. So I'm just gonna kind of start by playing the part of the conversation that I thought was where they were really kind of starting to cook with gas, and then we can like interrupt and comment as required. So here we go.
Completely recognize that with each other.
Yes.
And what that moreness is terribly difficult to articulate. But again, to pull a Peterson, we act as if that you have moreness and I have moreness. And when we don't act as if people have moreness,
we should recognize that. Although I think there's a way in which everything has moreness and everything has substance.
But then to sort of be, to what degree are we lending? So when I sit down, when I work with one of these homeless addicts, what I do in a very strange way is I, bit by bit, in tiny little increments, I lend my agency to them.
Yes.
How much of it they can accept and sort of internalize and take, and then help them grow more agency. Well, it's a very slow process, but it could be that, in fact, that's some of what we do with our sister. This stuff is just so, it's just so hard. It's so difficult, but
it is. And you're right. And I hope I'm not presenting my ideas in a hubristic way. We should approach them with humility and proper humility. And I'm trying to formulate non-theism as, properly exploratory in this way that we're doing here, and as a provocation to reflection and dialogue, and trying to break out of the sterile straitjackets that we find ourselves in. And I've been finding this conversation extremely helpful, both philosophically and personally, because these issues that I'm talking about, and I'm like, these issues, they stand on the border between impersonal philosophical reflection and personal involvement and transformation, and properly so. I mean, that's where they should be placed. And so I'm wrestling with this, and I see that you are too. And we both have loyalties. We don't want
Nate,
to.
do you mind pausing it?
Absolutely. Go for it.
So I think like what he's talking about, like this border between the personal and the non-personal, or super personal. I mean, I'll probably look at definitionally, I'll be a little bit different than John on these questions, but like I think that we're all trying to get to that kind of liminal space. What is that liminal space between person and what is beyond person, right? And so I think that that's where, as the discussion unfolds, I think when we're talking about Sophia, she allows us to speak in those liminal terms between personal and essential existence, and in a way that keeps us from necessarily having to make kind of metaphysical commitments that to non-personalism or thoroughgoing personalism. Is that she allows us to kind of hold both categories without denying the other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's actually like there's a bit like slightly earlier in the conversation. Um, I actually ended up playing the second later clip first
Mhm.
instead of the earlier one, where John is actually talking about wisdom, and he's talking about it in terms of that mediation.
Right,
But he's kind of groping toward it. He clearly doesn't have a solid conception of like how this works, but
right,
he's like, but he understands that like that wisdom is somehow serving a mediating capacity.
correct.
So this, if I can try to, because I'm in good company then, because I don't understand this either. To me, this is the reason that I wanted to be a part of this conversation, is because, well, I've wanted to have a conversation about personalism for about 2 months, because I don't know when it was, 2 or 3 months ago, I was like, this is the piece of the conversation that I think we've been circling around in this little corner that I think is missing for people to connect dots. And even in that clip, and it's connected to sociology, but even in that clip when John was saying this line between personal and impersonal, I get the immediate thought that I had is, I don't even know what impersonal is. The only way that I can really map that in my understanding is, because to me everything is personal. So being is fundamentally personal. And so this gets into like the conversations, Nate, you and I have had about the univocal definition of being, because that's the limit to me between, as Cal would say, freedom and constraint, being and non-being, and even theism and non-theism, because to me you could almost define God the Father, and I'm saying this within a certain probably non-egalitarian understanding of the Trinity, is beyond being. Like that's what I'm talking about when I say God is beyond being and beyond person. He's beyond all category. He is the pure spirit, infinite thing. And so when John is talking about this stuff, to me he's fighting. I made some comment about he's fighting like this really superficial, I think simplistic kind of moral therapeutic deism religion that is largely predominant in, I don't know, the modern world.
Yeah, I think that's clear in this conversation. He's like, there's like clear recognition of like, with like with the kinds of things that like the kind of people we know, the kinds of Christians that we know and interact with, and the sources that we read, he's seeing a kinship there with what he calls non-theism within what is typically called classical theism. Jed, I see you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if, kind of in John's language, like earlier in the interview, which I thought was an interesting distinction that he was making between sacredness and the sacred, right? Is that like my pushback there is that we can't, those are not mutually exclusive categories. It's a useful distinction, and I would actually agree with his distinction between sacredness and sacred, right? But the sacred is the personal, and it is actually the portal through which we experience sacredness.
Yeah.
Right. And so
yeah,
I
there
think
is
that
no experience of sacredness.
Yeah. So
sacred.
right.
Yeah.
So sacredness, what I think in this kind of, like, I think that it suffers from kind of some of the same things that we suffer from in Christian theology oftentimes, is when we're speaking in like essentialist categories, kind of the sacredness category, is we tend to speak of that solely through abstraction.
Yes.
Right. But we only experience sacredness as sacred,
I think
as persons. And I think that that's kind of where I think that I like the categories he's using, because they're really helpful. But then it's like, okay, well then what do we make of, like, you can't have, I would just argue you can't have one without the other. Like, you can say, well, I'm aiming for sacredness and this transformational sacredness. Well, that's always going to be experienced personally as sacred.
Yes.
However, you're going to define that.
Yeah, and body. This is where I'll bring in all Cal's language from Langen. I combined language and Langen.
Language.
This is how, Paul, this is why I don't finish sentences, because my mind is combining everything as I'm speaking. But it's freedom and constraint. And this is why understanding persons and even icons, I've been saying for the last few years too, iconography, the Seventh Ecumenical Council is like, if we would just believe that and go back to that, but we can't, we have to go further up and further, and there is no simple going back. This evolution of consciousness has happened, and so we have to return to it, but changed. That's my spiral dynamics thing. But we do need to go back to understanding icons, because that's essentially what you're saying. You can't understand sacredness apart from sacred. You can't understand God apart from the sun. It's impossible. There is no one can see God and live, because you can't, because it's impossible. You can't see God. The only way you see God is in the sun. That is the way it's done. You can't, the infinite is unintelligible. It's equivalent to nothingness. The only way that you can understand the infinite is through the constraint of the finite. That's just how it works. And that's iconography.
Yeah. I think that those are I think that we tend to, I think if you push into essentialism, what you put yourself into is kind of an undefined space, or a prison without walls.
Yes.
Right? Where we have a need as persons to make distinctions and differentiation so that we can develop and grow in understanding. And that's an important process. It's also a perilous process, because you can make the wrong distinctions. You can, but it's an important part of our mental processing. But when you if you look at a person as kind of a defined space, at least one aspect of personhood is a definitional space where the experience is happening, right? Then from that place, everything opens up to the person, right? And you realize as a person, even in this defined space, that's not all that I am. I exceed the space that I occupy.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And that's what
you have to, that starting point is just it gives you the entry point into a much bigger reality.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Well, that's where I'll bring in just Rupert Sheldrake and morphic fields. I mean, it's so much better, I think, to think of a person as a field almost than and even a body as a field. We think of things, what you see and hear depends a lot upon where you're standing and the kind of person you are. So we think of, and part of that is the current collective imagination that we play in, which is highly affected by philosophical materialism. We think of ourselves as constrained within this physicality that is a certain mapping and understanding of what a person is. But that doesn't mean that is exclusively what a person is and where we play in. We are affected by our evolution and our biology and our history and all of these different things. And I'm not a nominalist, so I don't think those things are just mere psychological things that we talk about. I think those things have reality that we are participating in. Our evolutionary biology exists in some way. It's a field that we participate in.
So I think the reason that John resists conceiving of the divine in terms of person, and I say person and not a person for a reason, but I think the reason he does that is because his understanding of person is not right. A person is not an object in any sense.
Yes.
You have not begun to describe what a person is if you were saying that a person is an object.
Well, I think that the bigger question there is, why does he think it is an object? And I think that has to do with possession.
Well, it's just scientific objectivity. It's it's the norm in our worldview to
Well, it's both of those, right?
And culturally, we're atomized individualism is how we think.
Yeah, but
possession is the spirit of our age, Shari. That exactly.
I understand that, but I think that at a deeper level, it's because people think that they can have something. They can.
Yes.
And John actually talks about this, you know.
Can I
having
just
a being, right?
Shari, do you mind? I just want to be really clear here. To be fair to John was very clear that he was talking about ontologically,
Yeah.
and not morally. So he's
Right.
not for objectifying persons morally.
No,
However,
absolutely. Yeah.
however, you need to have an ontological grounding for that moral position. And I would
Right.
say that he's wrong in thinking that a person is an object ontologically. No, that's wrong too.
Right. Well, like I said here, a person can be a thing through the act of possessing them. You can
Right.
use them as a thing, okay? And a thing can become a person when you surrender yourself to it. So
Yes. No, well said. That's succinct.
Right, but
Well
that
said.
means that you have to start thinking about being in a different mode.
Yes.
You have to stop
Well-
thinking about being you have to stop thinking about being as like a collection of different objects which have a thisness, and you start thinking about being as an interwoven field of connections and relations.
Yep.
well, I
You
just
need to-
think you can't
need
think
to-
your way out of that.
You need to flip your ontology from an object-oriented, substance-oriented mode into a relational mode. And this is actually this has classical roots. This is why Aquinas and Boethius both refer to God as a substantial relation,
Mhm.
or a relational substance.
Yeah, but
And
that's because they
that's what
experienced it
person
that way.
is. That's what person is. That's what consciousness is the experience of being as a set of relationships which make themselves intelligible to us.
Right. And you said it there too. You said an experience of being. So that's my point. It's that reciprocal act of knowing and acting, right? Like those things have to come together. Like you have to make the move towards it as it makes the move. It's always happening simultaneously, right? But you can't think your way out of thingness. You have to act your way out of it.
And you
No, I
actually,
like that. Put
Shari,
that on a
and
t-shirt.
Shari, you put your finger right on what you have to do too, which is why, like Jesus isn't telling the rich man to sell everything and follow him for no reason. You have to let go of this idea of possession in order to be able to have eyes to see.
Are you guys familiar with the thought or philosophy of Henri Bergson?
Only just a little tiny bit. I actually have an audio book
Okay.
that I've been listening to in
So
snippets.
he's really influential on a lot of people, including T.S. Eliot. So you see Bergson's ideas feature a lot in like his poem Four Quartets, right? But one of the things that is interesting about Bergson is how he orients the subject-object relationship, right? Is that there's always an interplay. Like sometimes you're the object, sometimes, if somebody's observing you, you're the object, but if you're observing them, you're the subject. And so you have this kind of this subjectivity and this objectivity that's in a constant dynamic interplay. But he talks about knowledge, and one thing that I think, and he puts it in terms of sympathy, right? That you cannot have knowledge of an object. Like, so I as a subject cannot have objective knowledge without entering into a sympathetic relationship with the object itself, in a sense, inserting myself, seeing myself in the object, right? Yeah. So
Is that sympathetic or is that empathetic?
Well, he puts it in terms of sympathetic, okay. But he's
it's
writing
also,
in
Shari,
Shari, I would say probably in terms of how we use the terms today, it's more like empathetic, okay. But he's saying sympathetic,
right?
Okay.
Right.
And Shari, this I hope you can see how this ties to what before we started recording you were actually talking about Goethe's approach to science, and
I'm thinking about it the whole time.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like it's exactly the same. It's exactly
running.
the same thing.
It's a program that's
So and I think John is trying to do this. I think I see that in him. Like he tends to look at things through a phenomenological lens. I think that he's trying to very much like to be non-reductive. He has like participation plays a really, really big
Yeah.
role in his thought through his engagement with Neoplatonism. So
I think to that point, and this is where I really want to, it's not even steel manning John's, it's like steel manning his character and his intuition. I think John, I would say, is very rightfully hesitant to go down paths of what I would call the problem in the West, which is like this egoic way of knowing, this way of possessing, of conflating what I call belief and thinking. And John, I think, is very hesitant, especially when it comes to God and theology, to affirm classically understood terms, because in a way, it's almost, I think of it in a very Jordan Peterson way. Our words sometimes have to die and resurrect. Like we have, the Father has to die and be born again for the consciousness to take root, because these words become platitudes.
Mhm.
And within Christianity, it's what I call the Sunday school answer. If you just say, this is what Christians are trying to get people to do all the time. It's what they did with Jordan Peterson. They're just like, is he a Christian? Does he affirm the historical resurrection? I'm like, that's not what a Christian is.
right.
It's not what a Christian is. And John, I think, intuits that and knows it and grew up in it. And so he's trying to,
Well, it's a protection from bullshit. And that's
yes.
John's biggest problem. He
Yes.
doesn't want to get bullshitted anymore. He's tired of the bullshit, right?
Well, I don't either. And I don't think you can, that's because that's not Christianity, and
Right.
that's not true religion. And I think John gets that, which is
Yeah.
right.
But yeah, and I totally, and
I
I
agree.
understand, and I like the kinds of things that he's subjecting to. I would also share that objection for sure,
Yeah.
100%. I mean,
Yep.
I'm a Christian perennialist and a universalist, so like
Yep.
we would be like on the same page on a lot of that
Yep.
criticism. I would say here where I would say like what I would say to John is that when Aquinas at the end of all of the Quinque Viae, when he says this, everyone, there's like a recurring refrain at the end of the arguments. When he comes to the conclusion, he'll say, "This everyone understands to be God." So like this thing that he's referring to by the term non-theism is exactly the same thing that Aquinas was talking about when he said, "This everyone understands to be God." Now, it may be true that in our time, there are a lot of people who have come to an understanding of God that does not match what Aquinas was talking about, or what
Yeah.
Maximus was talking about, or what Gregory of Nyssa was talking about, et
Yep.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that doesn't mean that they were wrong to use the term God for that. And
No.
that would basically be my objection.
Well, I think one of the things that is worth looking at too, like in I think in the most charitable possible way to like what John is talking about is a necessary rebellion against
Yes.
a theism that cannot possibly be real or true, right?
Right.
And so I think that his insistence that like like modern theisms are just because the modern project in terms of just epistemologically looks at knowledge as a kind of a foreclosure, like we're going to
Yes.
exhaustively grasp the whole thing and possess it for ourselves. And from that point, we're going to use that knowledge in a sense of like a weapon.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so his rejection of that, like, that's where it's like, well, it's hard to cast stones at John on this stuff, because like the problems he's identifying are absolutely real problems. Like if we're
Yep.
talking about God in the terms of like a deism, or basically anything at the level of pop Christianity right now, is basically
Yep.
John's atheism or non-theism is closer to true theism.
Yes.
Oh, for sure.
Than many models of Christian theism.
Like, I think
Right.
So his rebellion against that, like, it's almost there's a courage of exploration that he's trying to figure these things out, because you have to go out away from this defective theistic language. So like even the idea of like when you talk about God these days, people automatically the mental associations that come up in their mind about what and who and what God is or can be are invariably wrong.
Yes.
And so somebody's saying, hey, that's not what I believe. It's like, well, then you get into a definitional game of, well, what is it that you're talking about? And I think, yeah, my pushback with John would be like, hey, you can maybe sharpen some of your definitions that will help
Right.
give depth to your
I would say
understanding.
that
I like that aspect of what he's driving at,
I would
or the
say
spirit
that
that's animating it.
Mhm.
I would say that object-oriented definition of person actually leads exactly to C.S. Lewis's conception of hell in The Great Divorce.
Yeah.
Like this is not how you actually exist. This is not how you participate in being.
Right.
You're actually a nothing
Right.
at that point. If you're disconnected, if you're completely disconnected, like there's nothing left of you. There's no meaningful you to even talk about anymore.
Yep.
This is like, and I was very much where John was probably 5 or 6 years ago, and like very much like kind of leaning toward like Eastern forms of non-duality. And so I totally get where he's coming from. The thing that made the difference for me and made me see the appeal of Christianity is how fundamental those relations are to being. Like that the ground of being itself is a triune relational multi-unity. Like that's its defining trait, right? Like the one, like the I mean the and it is, and what is meaningful of us is in our relations. So the book that like really made me start to turn toward that understanding of the person was actually David Bentley Hart's Doors of the Sea, because he starts talking about how like if it's like if you pick the person who no one would argue about like deserves to be in hell. Let's say take Adolf Hitler, right? And it's like if you condemn Adolf Hitler to the fires of hell, you're not just condemning Adolf Hitler to the fires of hell, because what Adolf Hitler is not just an object that can be disposed of. Adolf Hitler had a mother who loved him.
Right.
And in destroying Adolf Hitler, you are destroying that love that his mother had for him.
Everything's connected. Yes.
So what Christianity does, it says those things are so meaningful that they go on forever, and that God will restore them and perfect them.
Well, Jed was making a point when we went.
No way.
Kind of mapping out this conversation in my mind, but I wanted to hear the rest of that idea of this empathetic or sympathetic thing that you were talking about, because what Nate just said illustrates the necessity of that action, right?
Yeah.
About Hitler's mother, for example. And, like for me personally, every created thing has an integrity, right? Mm-hmm. And that integrity is simply because God made it. So
yes, and Shari,
right?
Can I jump in quick? This is the fun. This is why I talk about PLS theology too. Is everything that is created fundamentally good or not?
I think it is.
Right. I mean, we would say that, which is why you would say something like, this is the difference. Because when you were talking about that, I want to just bring in and then go with Jed. But when Cal had a conversation with, who was it with? But when he brought up the Sandy Hook shooter, what's his name?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
But oh crap, whatever his name is.
I'm
but he
said, to remember his name anyways, Luke.
Right. Well, you're not supposed to, right? But we should. Right. But we
I know. I was being facetious, actually.
Yes, and so, but Cal brought up the point that he saw an interview with his dad, because the Sandy Hook shooter he was going to kill both of his parents before he went on this shooting spree and then killed himself. But then he saw an interview with his dad a few years later where his dad said he's gotten to the point where he wished Adam Lanza, who is his son, had never been born. Mm-hmm. That is the opposite of everything that I believe about God and Christianity. Right. That is anti-being. And that's the opposite. And that's the opposite of personalism. That's the opposite of Adolf Hitler's mother. I mean, who loved him. I mean, this is creation gone wrong. And my understanding of God and Christianity is redeeming the entirety of the cosmos, which is all interconnected, into new creation. And if you lose, and Nate said this once, if you lose any part of that, you lose all of it.
Right, you do.
Well, and you can't I mean, and you can't even with, and this isn't to sympathize Hitler in a way that it eliminates any of the horrible things that he did.
No, because we believe in responsibility.
But if you can't look at these men of that generation, right? Hitler fights in the Battle of the Somme, right? Which was hell on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If you have any idea of what warfare was in World War I, it broke these men.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It left scars that would never heal. And that the Second World War was the outworking of what happened, the horrors of it, what happened in the first. Right. Would Hitler have ever been the Hitler that we know if he had not, been basically swimming in a sea of mangled bodies for months on end in these horrendous battles during World War I? And his aesthetic sensibilities and all those kinds of things got turned in this really ugly direction. And so it to me, what it tells me is that there's a tremendous cost when a person gets lost, because he was lost, right? But a lost person is also without our ability to seek out and recover that which is lost, right? So then what happens is they pull us into that kind of that hellscape where it's in a sense, Hitler pulled the rest of the world into the Somme and made it and recapitulated that battle.
And the positive, there's a positive aspect to this too. There, in the clip that I played, Paul talks about lending his agency to these homeless people that he interacts with, right?
Yeah.
And it's so it's both the evil that we do and the good that we do. We are not wholly we are not wholly responsible for either. This is accomplished, both the evil and the good are accomplished through relational connections, either that are positive and reinforcing and moving you in the right direction, or that are negative and destructive and causing you to act out in potentially awful ways. There's no isolating that. We are really all in this together. So, which isn't to say, but your particularity is not obliterated by this. This is that is, and neither is your responsibility. So it's I don't think Hitler gets off. I'm not suggesting that Hitler gets off scot-free, because I believe that he, like everyone else, will eventually be restored. It's
well, and a restored Hitler and a one who's, go ahead, Shari. Go ahead.
Well, okay. So if Paul's lending someone his agency, is this form of empathy or sympathy that Jed was referring to?
Yeah.
Which would be a kind of kenosis.
Yeah, that was exactly the comment
Shari.
I made. That's exactly what I said in the comment section, Shari. So yes.
Jonathan Peugeot, kenosis by kenosis.
Right, because I think, in the act of surrendering, your lending, let's say, use Paul's language, lending someone your agency. Okay, you surrender, you're giving yourself to them. You're moving into this empathetic mode of being, right? And it's in that space between that Jed was talking about at the beginning of this conversation, which I love. I love spaces in between, because it's the space between where the person no longer becomes a thing, right? Or the thing can be a person. It can't happen if you don't act in a canonic way towards it. If you don't empty yourself into the thing, it doesn't become a person.
Right. And that's kind of I don't know who said this. Is it Irenaeus? But the glory of God is man fully alive or something. And it reminds me of Pinocchio or anything. That's what That's what God is doing. And that's what we as co-creators are doing and procreators are doing. That's what it means to parent, is you are
Right.
Well, that's what
rearing your child.
agape does, right?
Yes.
Agape loves something into being. It empties
Yes.
itself onto the thing.
And John knows that. That's his. This is the
He knows
difference
all of
He
it.
knows
He
that.
knows
This
He
is
knows
this is
that.
the difference.
John has
between
all the
thinking
pieces.
and believing. This is why I distinguish between thinking and believing, and the egoic intellect. Everybody believes this. Everybody's true self believes this. We just don't think that we do.
I think.
Well,
I think.
but
What
I
John,
think that
Go ahead, John.
yeah, that's where, yeah, when you're talking about thinking, right, we're trying to describe a
Yes.
set of beliefs that are by nature ineffable.
Yes.
Defy description and definition.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so when when you hear John describing his beliefs, like, and there's a resonance there because it's already, this is embedded in the reality of being itself. Like, you can't think outside of being. You can't
Right.
think outside of those structures.
Correct.
But when
Well
you're
said.
thinking into it, like you're having to formulate kind of this understanding based on how your interplay with being, right? It, like, his thing reminds me, like, and I see it somewhat also in Zizek's Christian atheism.
Yes. Yeah.
Is we, like, in a sense, like, I see Nietzsche as like a prophet, like one of the most important prophets in our history. The God that he's talking about that we killed was a God we needed to kill.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. I agree.
It was an anti-God. It was a declension from any sense of what divinity and deity actually was. Like, the modern God, the Cartesian God, is a God that has to be killed, obviously, with all the hazards and horrors that entailed, because we, in a sense, were spun off from our theistic moorings and, like, have had to navigate a modern world where there are no longer fixed moral norms and all these kinds of things. Nietzsche knew that, but that God had to die, right? And we did kill him, right? And it's happening again and again. But what's interesting is that, among highly intelligent people, is that there is now this return. So after God is dead, who are we coming back to? Well, you can talk about non-theism, but John's talking about God. And it reminds me, I wanted to read this. This is from Four Quartets, and it reminds me of, this is kind of this historical epic that we're in right now. Is at the very end of Four Quartets, he says, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time." Is we're getting back to that place where, these highly intelligent thinkers have we live with the weight of history, and they're returning to something that, and helping us see it again for the first time, right? And so even in John's non-theistic theism, for whatever we want to call that, it's a return to understanding something that we've always known, but we forgot along the way. And to actually, it's like building understanding for the first time, because how can we begin to describe incarnational realities in Christian terminology without this deeper understanding of what's going on that John's talking about?
Right.
Well,
Like, you can bring in the incarnational and you can bring in the sacred again, because what you're talking about is not the God that Nietzsche's talking about, who we killed. That's not the incarnate God.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
the God that we kill, that Nietzsche talks about, it's like taking the teddy bear away from the child.
I love it.
Right? It's like saying, no,
Yeah.
this is just a teddy bear.
Well, it's grow up.
And
that actually reminds me of
but then the
Douglas
child
Harding. Yeah.
the child grows up and says, but wait, finds the teddy bear and then realizes that it was actually incarnated. Okay? That teddy bear was more than just a stuffed animal. and can consider all of the ways that teddy bear comforted them, right? The relationship that they had to that teddy bear. I don't know if you get what I'm saying, but it's like this withdrawal, right? It's like rip the teddy bear out of your hands and then leave you what? Hopeless, comfortless, right? And in that process, you come back to the place that you, like he says in the poem, right, where you started. And there you are at the age of 75 with your teddy bear, and it has actually become a person.
Yeah, it's as if nothing actually becomes alive unless it dies.
Well, that's like, Luke, I'm glad you brought Harding, because in what she's saying here, like you can combine what she just said and what we were talking about earlier about possession, and then what we're talking about kenosis, like that does tie, because that's what Harding's talking about.
Yes,
He's talking about you begin in your childhood innocence, like having this, and I would say that and then through the 4 stages of life, like you hopefully, if you're fortunate and you learn to see in the seer mode at the end, then you regain that capacity.
Right.
So, but it is through that learning to use without possessing is how you do that.
Well, you don't use, actually. Learning to be without possession. Because
you still have to make use of things.
Well, you do, but you don't use them. You interact with them.
Right.
That's how I see it. You know,
interaction is maybe a better term than use.
Right, because
but there's a way of
because it's a gift giving. It's a reciprocal gift giving. Okay,
it's a dance.
Right. It's like
you don't use your dance partner. You dance with your dance partner.
Right. Right.
Maybe cooperation is maybe it's related to the.
It's like that example I gave on the Boxer one day about the tree. The tree is all the things, right? The tree is your house. It's firewood. It's shelter. It's a nesting place. It's fertilizer for the ground beneath it. It's all those things. And so depending on the relationship that you have with the tree, right? But the thing is, though, the tree is a gift giver.
Right. But it makes all the difference in the world to see it that way, as opposed to seeing the tree as merely an object for you to exploit.
Right.
That completely changes your relationship to the tree.
Right.
And
well, I think it's a mode of anti-being. Actually, it's the mechanistic, vision of the universe. It's robots. There's no reason. Identitarianism is not surprising when you understand that the whole way of non-being that produces isolated, atomized individuals is stemming from this way of seeing reality.
But this is a very North American, Indian, or First Nations way of seeing the world, right? And I think that the reason why it's so prolific, like universally, if you look at any kind of people that live simple lives or have lived, close to the land, or let's say, there's a humility in their very existence because they are vulnerable, right? And so without the gifts, they cannot survive. And so they are grateful for the gifts. Now we live in a world where we don't have to be grateful. We think that we own everything, right? Yeah. We can flick on the light. We can flush the toilet. We can turn on the tap, and, and we did it.
Yeah.
Hours.
And we're rushed and everything's inconvenient.
That's I think that this is where the language that I do like Bergson's. I understand why we speak in terms of empathy versus sympathy. But I think at a definitional level, like, what is sympathy? It's together pathos.
Yes.
Right.
Well, it's interesting because in German, when you have a good relationship or somebody strikes you as being kin, it's called sympathisch.
Yeah.
That's the German word, is sympathisch, right? So And
we look at that in terms of synergy or symbiosis. It's a togetherness. We're in this together.
Yes.
Right. And so the empathy is I'm putting myself into you. Empathos is I'm inside of you in some way. And that's fine. That's and how we use it in modern parlance. It's what but I think what we're meaning is something sympathetic. Like there's a togetherness
Yeah.
in our experience that honors, subject and object
Right.
together are bound in a mutuality that is, we're in this story together, right? And so like the, first people's kinds of questions of like, just even in terms of their relationship with nature, right? Well, they're in it together with nature. So whether that's, what they're hunting and killing and eating, whether it's, natural material like wood, and whatever it is that they're using, is that there's a togetherness that they don't see the world in terms of isolated objects for their use.
No, they see
Right.
everything as a sacrifice, actually.
Yeah, there's a giving and a receiving in the exchange that is happening.
Yeah.
And there's we lost that somewhere along the way in the West, right? And I think some of like our part of that, I think, is a necessary loss of innocence, right? Because what being Western has enabled us to do is it has enabled us to have a much more highly developed and refined understanding of what it is to be an individual. And that's good. But you have to come back to that place and understand it for the first time.
That's your poem.
Yeah.
Okay. That's also Barfield.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
This is
and
also
Harding.
And
This is
Harding.
also very,
And Harding.
this is very
Right,
Peter
it's all the same
Rollins,
story.
too.
And
Yeah.
Peter Rollins? I've never listened to him.
This is what his whole project is about, essentially, is like what you just said, Jed, I think.
Yeah, and so that's where it's like even the kind of if you can step back into this process sympathetically, like understand like, hey, these ideas are unfolding as a natural process of being manifesting itself in time, figuring itself out.
Yep.
Then it's like, well, like, yeah, I'm going to, as a Christian, I'm going to insert a different set of understandings into some of these discussions than maybe like John Vervaeke would when he's talking about sacredness. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about it. But he's recovering a language that I think is important. And after this far end, after the death of God, what comes after? Well, we're finding out that like eventually there's a return.
Right.
Like there's a return to that because you can't, like, you can kill basically what the death of God, what we killed was a demiurge.
Yes.
We didn't kill the fountain and source of all being.
How could you?
Yeah, it's like, but what we killed an idea of God that was just a bad idea. And
Yes.
It's like
So
a bad,
here's
messy,
a
ugly breakup.
Yeah.
Here's a thought. I wonder what you think of this, Nate, because it was actually while I was listening to Chris's recent conversation with Ivan and Caleb.
That was so good.
I don't remember what portion of their conversation, but anyway, they were talking about repentance, and it dawned on me because John the Baptist came along. He was the forerunner of Christ, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, repent, 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 and he was baptizing people. Repentance is actually the word metanoia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means a renewing of the mind.
Right.
And immediately I thought about Barfield, and I thought, oh, is this an evolution of consciousness, right? Because if the call to repentance equals a renewing of the mind, that has to equal an evolution of consciousness, right? And then, of course, then Jesus appears on the scene, and what happens? Everything changes. Like even John Vervaeke says that's the Christian story brings in this idea of agape, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. What was the question?
Well, if you think that there are these markers, because like Jed was talking about Nietzsche, saying you've killed God, right? And everyone goes, oh, we've killed God, now what, right? Someone ripped the teddy bear out of their hands, right? But if you look at it from a Barfieldian perspective or a Steiner perspective, even, then it's an evolution, even like Bach, right?
Right.
It's this time to repent Okay, like Nietzsche's call is almost a call to repentance, isn't it? You've killed God. Now you need to repent. Oh, what is repentance? It's a metanoia. It's a renewing of the mind. It is a turning, right? In 180 degrees. It's a totally different way of seeing the world. So I'm just wondering if it's an evolution of consciousness.
Well, from my perspective, yes, and this is something I think that, I mean, I think that I know that John is an admirer of Whitehead, so I'm pretty sure that he would like definitely think of being as process and becoming.
Right.
I would say that's not quite right from my perspective, though, because
Okay.
that's becoming.
Right. The
being
process is-
being is where becoming is headed, which he's leery of telos, so he doesn't necessarily, but he's sympathetic to the epistasis. So even that requires there to be something that is drawing us toward it. Like there has to, like, so like I don't see how, like, what are we, I mean, there's no way to make sense of the direction of our becoming if there is not some being to ground it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the nature of like that's like what, like the concept of an entelechy is, right? You know, the entelos, right? You have something that you're starting with, that your starting point is being, that is becoming into being, right?
Right.
And that is kind of the nature of what our existence is, and it's an everlasting expansion in an exploration of becoming into being. And
That's why Jesus can say, if you seek, you will find.
Right.
Because
right.
he trusts the process. That's why.
Right. And like, you know, for us, that sometimes means, you know, getting lost in the labyrinth, finding a dead end, and having to retrace our steps and keep
There's no
Yes.
guarantees, right?
And I think there's like that's a part of like a part of the human story that we as Christians do not do good honor to.
No.
Right. Is
No,
that we don't honor the fact that people are like, we can give textbook Christian answers and assume that settles the fact.
Yeah.
Right. But that's still a cognition, and cognition is not being. Cognition is a part
Right.
of being.
Well,
Right.
I
So
think
getting the right cognitive framework can be helpful, like obviously can be helpful, and is important in terms of having a convergence with reality. Your cognition wants to correspond to reality. But that journey that people are taking into that is something I think that we have to honor as sacred.
right.
The journey itself is a sacred journey, and the search itself is a sacred journey. And what we can do is, from a Christian vantage point, and what Christian witness is a kind of like that kind of bodhisattva kind of type of existence where we're here in your journey until you find yourself, you know, and as opposed to like, I'm here to give you the right, you know, information about God so that you can be saved, sign on the dotted line, pray after this, you know, tract, or, you know, be a part of these certain sacraments. Like those are all like, I mean, obviously like I am very much into the sacraments as a Christian, but it's like, until those are more than just kind of mental categories, but living realities, you know, they can sometimes, you know, we
but
treat
what
them as a
the
lower form of
sacrament,
magic.
the sacrament is, I mean, it's communion. Like, so,
Right.
Yeah.
like,
So unless you're getting into what the sacrament is signifying.
Right, exactly. Unless you're finding a way to actually commune with being, which means like all of the things we've been talking about, like finding that sympathy, right? And finding that interconnectedness and that relationality. Like if those things aren't not, if whatever tradition you're in, you're not actually like finding those things, then it's probably good for you to deconstruct so
Yes.
that you can find actual connection with those things.
Yeah, you have
What I
to
think,
be
like those of us
instructed.
those are like, in using, like, let's use the Eucharist example, right? Those of us that are, and I still am very much attracted to and love high church sacramentalism of any kind, because I think it brings out the splendor and the wonder of the Eucharistic meal. But let's not forget what that was. It was Jesus sitting at a table with his disciples as a family. It was a family meal. And so the way we want to elevate that, because it is everything, right? And so we, in our liturgical life, we elevate that reality. But sometimes we can end up abstracting it from the concreteness of this was just
And we
a
can
group of people sitting down and sharing a meal.
It happens on Sunday and not at the family meal.
Right. And so there's, and I think that and I know people that are involved in the home church movement that, for all the criticisms that may be leveled against that, they are trying to recover something that we lost along the way. Is that this was churches took place in the home. It was connected to families. It was connected to life on the ground in a way that, and they didn't need to elevate that with ritual in order to feel that transcendence in their experience.
Right.
Because
and it's supposed to be a both. It's supposed to be a both.
Yeah.
And,
so I'm not saying
Sunday
don't have the ritual. Like,
right.
I think that's really important. And what the church has done with the sacraments in our elevation of the sacraments is not wrong, but we have to understand what it was. It's a family meal.
Yeah.
And that's actually the picture of reality that God is giving us. This is what
it's a
reality
family.
is.
Yes. And that's exactly right. And this is why, like, I've been listening to some Kabbalist thinkers lately. And that's kind of like where I see like this sort of like Sophianic bridge between Christianity and Judaism, where I see both are like operating in the same understanding of like being as like the family of God. And through the Shekinah, you have like a mother figure that I think is represented in Christianity. The Holy Spirit is feminine, and obviously so. And Mary is a manifestation of the Holy Spirit. It's pretty obvious. The symbolism is so obvious. I don't know why we bother denying it.
But also feminine, not female. Let's make that distinction, because people will
feminine.
get ridiculous.
Right.
Well, I think that when we get into that, I mean, when I meditate on like the Spirit, right? This will sound, maybe outrageous a little bit, but I think you're looking at both. Right. You're looking at not androgynous in the way we would express it, but the Spirit is encompassing both masculinity and femininity in a way that defies easy, because the Spirit is the way the Spirit moves. And even Jesus says, where it comes from, no one knows. Right. But its effect. And right. And so we feel that. And so I'm not going to be bold enough to venture a theological definition there, because it's like I don't care about defining life in the Spirit. But if you're eliminating the feminine out of that equation, and that's where I think I like what you're saying, is like, well, obviously, like, and Paul Young does that in The Shack, right, and does it very well.
Oh no, you've just closed so many ears. How dare you?
No, I don't care. If people don't like Paul Young in The Shack, we can have that argument. And like, if you're reading that as a theological treatise as opposed to what it is, which is a story and it's poetics, then you're missing the point.
I answered a joke. Keep going with what his point was. Sorry.
But yeah, so the idea of like kind of misgendering, well, we get into gendered language in our context, and so we're wanting to figure that out. But it's like, I like that aspect of it just because it's pulling you further into the mystery of like, well, who is this Spirit that occupies, that is the third person of the Trinity that we know nothing about.
But the Shekinah is in Judaism is feminine, right?
His mother, yeah, and I think I really think that's what the spirit is. I just do. I'm just convinced. Like it, and everything makes more sense. It's like, well, first of all, like we use all this family language in the church, right? Like brother, sister, call the priest father. Like we call God is God the Father. Like, and then just like, I mean, in
Where's
terms of like,
Mom?
right, exactly. In terms of in terms of mythological patterns. I mean, like I think I think it's no accident that like like cross culturally you have this mythological pattern of like Sky Father, Earth Mother, you know, and then and the hero god that's born from that union. So I think that like we're fighting against something that's really, really deeply embedded and has like it's so symbolically obvious. I don't know why we're resisting it. But here's the thing. So like, just to go back to the Jewish example. So like through Kabbalah, you have the introduction of the Shekinah. And so you have God and the Shekinah, and then Israel is the child, right? So you have like it's the same kind of structure that you see if you see the spirit as feminine within the Trinity, you have the same model within Trinity. It becomes Father, Mother, Son. And it is through Christ that we join that multi-unity that is the Trinity. Whereas in Judaism, it's through Israel. But it's the same exact structure. And it's like, oh, we're talking about the same thing and we're just using just very slightly different words. You can see like where there's just this complete convergence. So that's why I want to make that move.
And then
and I think that
sorry. Go ahead.
I think that the like within like Sophiology, right? Sophia is as mother. I put that relationship directly, you know, in relationship with father, right? And so I tend to look at, you know, in terms of just structurally, right? The son is to us as brother, right? And in a sense, like what you're talking about, Nate, the spirit would, in that sense, be to us sister, and that the matrilineal kind of aspect of Sophiology is repeated. It's repeated so many ways throughout the created realm that that's where it becomes hard to pin down in terms of definitionally.
I'm not talking. I'm only talking in the realm of symbolism. I'm not talking in the realm of definitions.
Because I think that that's where we have to keep that, is at a symbolic level, because it allows for the elusive element within symbolism. It gives it that space to just say, hey, we can't completely define this, and there's no need to.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything.
We contemplate the Theotokos. This is why we contemplate the Theotokos, because we cannot articulate it. We have to contemplate.
Well, and Jordan Wood, like his whole comment on Mary was, and I want him, I'm like begging him to write an essay on it, but he and I've been in conversation where he said this, is that, you know, our cosmos owes its existence to a teenage girl who said yes to God. Right. Like this world, and so there's human agency. The human agency in the world is a receptivity to God. Like, and the world does not exist without that. Right. And so, you know, his basically like the cosmos wouldn't exist if Mary had not and somehow refused the incarnation.
And this this feminine aspect, which is tied somehow both to Mary and to the spirit, like and it's connected to this figure of wisdom, right, in Sophiology. Like John is like, that's what he's kind of groping toward. There was a point in the conversation where he actually talked about like wisdom being like the thing that mediates between.
I have a timestamp.
Oh, do you? Oh, do you? Can you share a screen and play it?
I can't, because I'm a Luddite.
If you have the timestamp, I'll just like go to that part of the video.
Okay, cool. So it's 40 minutes, 47 seconds. That's where he talks about transformation through wisdom.
Transformation through wisdom. Okay.
While you're doing that, I just wanted to read out of the liturgy, the Matins liturgy, about Mary. All creation was amazed at thy divine glory, for thou O unwedded virgin, didst hold in thee the God of all, and didst bear the eternal Son, who rewards with salvation all those who sing thy praises. So that's exactly what.
Did you say, sorry, did you say 40-40?
47. Yeah,
40-47,
40
okay.
or whatever. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
I got it to 40-41. That's close enough.
yeah.
And this is a hermeneutic exegetical claim. I claim that all of these traditions have said that those transformations have to be bound up with the aspiration to wisdom, right? Where wisdom, again, doesn't mean being logical. It means this systematic attempt to systemically intervene in one's cognition to reduce self-deception, both individual and collective, and enhance meaning in life, right?
Okay, pause. Sorry.
And for me,
I remember listening to this and like half of me loved it and half of me hated it, because he's saying this isn't like some logic thing, but then he said I wish I just had a transcript, because it's you systematically go through your thinking.
Yeah, right. He said
he
talked about both systems and self-deception. I'm like, there's still too
right,
much in a modernist frame there.
No, it's like, this is one of my favorite kind of thoughts is I heard from this guy named Krishna Das once, but like, you cannot think yourself out of a prison made of thought.
Right.
Like and that's the problem, is if you're trying to, and this gets into what we were talking about earlier, and Jed, you were saying this, and Richard Rohr said this just to make more people stop their ears, but you don't so much think your way into a new way of acting as much as you act your way into a new way of thinking, which is why I'm more of a, I tend to almost idolize liturgy. And I understand the problem with that, because the thinking needs to come with it. Like all of that needs to be integrated. But I think very, very often, this is what C.S. Lewis's book, The Abolition of Man, is about. This is why we're not just like stick men with giant heads, because most of what and this gets into like all of the Michael Polanyi, Esther Mead.
Have you seen my head, Luke?
Stuff. Huh?
It's pretty big. I'm kind of skinny with a big head though, so I hope that's okay.
Yeah, well, right. And then the problem is you don't, most of what I would just say it this way: the vast majority of what is not conscious, articulable thought. That's kind of one of Michael Polanyi's big points. And so, yes, I agree, you need to rid yourself of self-deception, but you do that, I would say, even predominantly through participating in particular habitual collective rituals, certain fields that are historically rooted, transcendent of time, rather than just like staying in this prison, this locked prison of your thinking. Like you're just like, I'm going to eradicate self-deception through thinking about it. Okay.
This is my criticism of like the liturgical Christian, right? Is that they will think of these, we still look at our liturgy as moderns, as foreclosure, that it is the reality, as opposed to it is what is signifying and reenacting a reality that is much bigger than what we can name, right? And so you get into that in the traditionalist communities, that they want to reduce the Christian life to this liturgical reenactment, when it's like that reenactment is a signification of something much bigger that we are involved within. Yeah, but so I think there's a reduction that some people make within that, and then they miss what the liturgy actually is, right?
What it's pointing toward.
It is your entrance point into that broader reality, right? And so there's always a temptation to make, to idolize in our minds, as opposed to allowing ourselves to enter into that more of a participatory reality.
But it's an icon, right? The liturgy is an icon, so it's both. It is a participation into that reality, but it's also, but if you idolize it, it becomes dead.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's the tightrope that we have to walk on, right? Is that that we're participating in a mystery. Well,
it's also the problem with categories, right? Like people separate everything into categories, and they it's like shining a flashlight in a castle on a dark moonless night.
But I wonder if it's
You're
like
just getting bits and pieces when
I
you
want
do that.
okay, I'm gonna say something. I don't know if this is gonna make any sense or not, but I wonder if, like, if people who are idolizing the liturgy, I wonder if that's not a result of a failure to really commune with the liturgy. Because right,
Yeah.
because the liturgy is pretty. The liturgy and the prayers are pretty amazing, because for whatever reason, the liturgy and the prayers seem to not be prone to the same kinds of forming the same kinds of idol notions of God that we're talking about earlier in the death of God, right? Like those, the prayers in the liturgy, they don't like, they don't go off course as much.
No, they don't at all, actually. And like, you're right. That's why I'm talking about, categories. Like, it's like, oh, it's Sunday box. Okay, now I'm going to walk into that box, and then I'm going to walk out of that box back into my normal life. It's all separated.
Well, they can also, not only that, they have the power to sometimes point us out where we've gone wrong in the dogmas, right? So like hell is eternal hell is an official dogma of the Catholic Church, but read the last rites. Listen to listen to what the Roman Rite is actually saying in Latin. Like look at the Fatima prayer and the Rosary. It's like, yes, you ask to have your soul saved from hell, but it also ends with, but lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy. So like there's a preservation of something deeper in the liturgy and prayers that is like,
right, because
it's more than the dogmas contain.
When the posture is worship, right? When the posture is worship, and we're entering consciously into that space with that language, our language almost invariably doesn't go wrong.
Right.
Well,
right.
It's again that thing that I was talking about looking at the thing as a person. Right, and giving it its own integrity, like allowing it to be integrity in what it is. And
right, that's so good, Shari, because that's exactly it. You just nailed it. Like, it's looking at it as a person, because that's what both liturgy and prayer, it's like they are both, they're acts of communion. Like, they were written for the sake of communion.
Yeah. And like, I have another timestamp here because John, well, maybe if you just play it, you'll see. And I think it kind of fits nicely with the one that you just watched, because he already realizes that wisdom is the thing that protects you from the bullshit. Okay, just to put it in really pedestrian terms. So it reduces self-deception and it enhances meaning in life, right? So basically it gives you a demeanor, a calm demeanor. You're not like, am I being deceived here? Like, do I really know what's going on? Like, and that's really what the world is all about right now, right? Like, are we evolved? Were we created? Who's telling me that, what is this coronavirus, and what? Nobody knows where they are. They're so afraid of deception, right? So, but if you play 145, 145,
145,
yeah,
you got it. Okay, let me.
There's something really interesting there.
All right, you said 145, 45.
Yeah.
All right, that's close enough.
Yeah.
Let's see, you're at 146.
Yeah, a lot. He's playing. He sets
46
positions up.
Oh, go back. Yeah.
Go back just like a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, you just
there.
There you go.
Perfect.
I don't know. Peterson has good language about it. He says, "Oh, that's archetypal. You can't get around it," and that's how I feel about that story often. So,
and you should. I mean, I'm not trying to challenge or deny that. What I was trying to get at was, just as like there's an intuition that the agent and the arena, there's something below them. I'm wondering if there's an impersonal and personal form of finesse, and there's something below that. People have coined this term transpersonal, and they're trying to get clear about what it means. But and I'm thinking that those two, they fit inside each other. I'm not quite sure which fits inside which. That's what I've been trying to gesture towards. And I see, I'm reading Nicholas of Kuz.
Okay, so what I loved about that was John is talking about agentic and arena, okay? Mm-hmm. Which I think is bogus, just to be really honest. Totally, because that's not how God operates. He's not like, well, I'll put my agent coat on today, and and tomorrow I'm going to head out into the arena. Right. It is agent and arena all the time. Okay, that's panentheism, right?
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so John does this. Why does he make this shape? Because he knows that they belong together. He doesn't say agent and arena. He says agent and arena and what lies below. Mm-hmm. And he's looking for the thing that lies below. What is joining them together?
And it looks like a grail.
and then he says they fit inside each other. And I right away thought about the icon of the Theotokos with Christ inside.
Which also looks like a grail.
Which also looks like a grail, right? There it is. And then of course the first clip was he talks about wisdom, right? That he sees that people are transformed through wisdom. And then at the second clip, he's looking for the thing, right, that joins the agent arena, panentheism. Here's panentheism right here. And he's looking for the thing below, which is what he already knows. It's Sophia. Okay,
that was that was my thought when he was talking about the thing below. It's like, no, you don't want the thing below. You want the thing in between.
Well, he says they fit.
You're looking for the metaxu, not what's underneath. You're looking for what's in between.
Well, I think the underneath for John is the connection point, right? It's the thing that connects the agent arena, and he already knows that there is no such thing as agent arena. It's agent arena.
Right.
This.
Right.
And he does this over and over again in that.
And I think that's where we get to. This is where, like, the term agent and arena, like I have less of an issue. I think that those can be helpful, but we have to understand the limitations of any time we're talking about anything, right? We understanding is good to have, right? It's good to acquire, and it's good to disseminate understanding, but it is never something you can lean on, because there's something above understanding, and that's Sophia. That is wisdom, that is all encompassing. And that as soon as you think that you can lean on your understanding or your definitional terms, like eventually those terms, every word we use evaporates into nothing. Just like when you're diving into the atomic structure of reality, eventually you get down to the point where everything disappears. There's something still there, but we don't have a name for that.
Trying to seek understanding that way, you will never have the peace that passes understanding, actually, which is what we all
because
want.
It all disappears in this infinite regression.
Well, Sophia, right, and Sophia is associated with beauty because the route to that interaction is through vision. And it's not just merely your physical vision, but your imagination too, which is your spiritual vision. And that is how you come in contact with that. And it's not through this apprehensive, understanding, intellective mode. That's not how it's done.
No,
do you mind if we have Shari, like she was reading before we kind of started, she was reading
the
McDonald. And I think that like what she was reading, I would like, if it's okay, Shari, can you read that? Because I think it's exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, let me see if I can find it here.
Yeah, it's good. McDonald is always so good. And that gets into,
Yeah.
I mean, Shari has said this, like there is no, the subjective objective divide again, like that's fine. You can talk about it, but in reality, it's the same. They're together. I keep holding my phone. So it's like the Grail again.
It's St. George MacDonald, by the way. David Bentley Hart canonized him.
Of course.
Yeah.
There you go.
No, he said that
And
a
it's
long time
also-
ago.
In the
imagination
new
is
Bible,
also-
in the age to
sorry.
come, in our new Bible, whatever it is, his stuff, his work is all canon, by the way.
Yeah.
All of it.
There you go.
We will be preaching from George MacDonald. You know, can you turn to the 7th chapter of Lilith?
Yeah. And it also gets into, this is something, I don't know if you guys said this, but the imagination and what McDonald says here is not, because this is a point that I want to stress, and we maybe won't get to do it today, and I'm gonna have to go in a little bit, but personalism and imagination is necessarily subjective and plays in the objective, but it's not relativism. It's really not.
No.
But I think people will go there. Like I know
It's relativism in the sense that it's relational.
Yes,
Right?
Right? That's
exactly.
what a relative is, but it's
Exactly.
not
Yes.
relative in the sense that it has there's no concreteness to it.
Yes. No, well said. Well, we'll timestamp that, people that will accuse personalists of relativism.
Okay, here we go. For what are the forms by means of which a man may reveal his thoughts? Are they not those of nature? But although he is created in the closest sympathy with these forms, yet even these forms are not born in his mind. What springs there is the perception that this or that form is already an expression of this or that phase of thought or of feeling. For the world around him is an outward figuration of the condition of his mind, an inexhaustible storehouse of forms whence he may choose exponents, the crystal pitchers that shall protect his thought and not need to be broken that the light might break forth. The meanings are in those forms already, else they could be no garment of unveiling. God has made the world that it should thus serve his creature, developing in the service that imagination whose necessity it meets. The man has but to light the lamp within the form. His imagination is the light. It is not the form. Straightway the shining thought makes the form visible and becomes itself visible through the form. For the world is the human being turned inside out. All that moves in the mind is symbolized in nature. Or to use another more philosophical and certainly not less poetic figure, the world is a sensuous analysis of humanity, and hence an inexhaustible wardrobe for the clothing of human thought.
Thanks, Shari.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think like some of like what this is, what I'm watching in that conversation with John and Paul is you're watching the imagination process in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, if you like, so I've written fiction and I'm working on more, is you understand this if you're a creative writer, if you write poetry, anything like this, is that an image will fixate in your mind, right? But you're waiting for the light to come on and to shine on that, right? And it's like, it's a slowly you realize what it is that you were what the image that was presenting itself in your mind actually is, and then you can write about it, right? Then you've acquired enough knowledge of like a poetic image or developing a scene in fiction or whatever it is that we do. That is the process that they are in the middle of. Is there's a sketching out in the visionary process, in the imagination process, that then becomes kind of a stable draft, right? And so I see what I see John doing in terms of his kind of non-theism thinking into God, is that you see the light is kind of, it's not flicking on all at once, but it's kind of like a stage lighting. The panorama is beginning to show itself in his thinking, right? And you're getting a sense of like, oh, this is something really magical and wonderful that he's beginning to tease this out. But it doesn't mean that everything is given its full final shape or form yet until you can really see what the image is. And so I was just, when I see that conversation, and the power of that conversation is that something really powerful is getting sketched out there that is admitting both the modern categories and our modern contextualization, but is tapping into something that we lost and that we're coming back to and knowing for the first time.
Well said.
Mhm.
Well said. I think
And if we get further into the like the imaginary and the Sophianic, right? That's the same thing.
I
Right?
know. Yeah, I was just
That's
gonna say
that's where like the wisdom is the all-encompassing.
Because-
Like if you look at the kind of the seven heavens structure, wisdom is the first heaven, the highest heaven, and it encompasses all the other heavens, the seven heavens, right?
that's because a true act of imagination is not making things up, it's seeing the real.
Yes, that is, and that's the
Yeah.
biggest difference of like where like we consider imagination in very neurotic terms. Like, oh, this is just a figment of my imagination. Well, I would propose to you there's no such thing.
Right.
Well, actually, George MacDonald does make the distinction between imagination and fancy.
Right.
And
Coleridge too,
Yeah.
and Barfield.
Yeah, and he believes that, you should not encourage fancy in children, but you should encourage the imagination. And the imagination is a seeking mechanism, right? It's the thing by which you seek the truth. And so that's how Goethe employed it. He employed the imagination with which to seek truth.
Mhm.
And that's what enabled him to see the flower being born out of the leaf. Right?
And that's what I think. This is what I really respect about John, is like, I definitely see him as trying to do science in that Goethean mode,
Yeah.
where he is like really, he is in fact like trying to look at wholes and not just parts. He is trying to
Well, that's why he's looking for the thing underneath.
empirically
He's
consider
looking
both
for
the
hole.
right. He's empirically considering both the internal and the external, and he's taking it all into consideration. And that's like that's
Well,
all
and
I
you
have to
look
say
at
there.
even like that, but that it filters into, which is in the most ironic ways, into our science, right? If we look at the great scientific discoveries, like Einstein was not a great mathematician.
Right.
Like there were people who were better at math than Einstein. What he had was a bold act of imagination.
Right.
And that's what
He saw
even
something.
says that.
He saw something that was there. Same with Newton. Like you look at Sir Isaac Newton's writings, the guy's like, he's weirdo, like awesome, and most awesome, and I mean that as a compliment. Like, he's got his translation of the Emerald Tablets. Like the guy is out there. He's in a different space, and because he's in that different space and he's good at math, he can describe relationships in ways that weren't possible to most of us. Tesla's the same way. And so like the idea that imagination, like, and I think that's the difference between imagination and fancy or fantasy, right? And when we load the world with our fantasies, that's where we get into the realm of Maya or illusion. That's the illusory aspect of our world, is a bad and failed imagination, right? Because an image, that iconic side of things is God repeated, right? And we're recognizing God in the realm of finite things. So it's just an imaging forth. The fantasy is the not quite, is the defective, is the falling away from.
Well, it's the possession again.
Yeah, it's how can I own
that?
how can I get the lover that I want, or how can I get the house that I want? And so much of our, like, what our imaginations are supposed to be are geared toward just like geared toward that kind of thinking of just, we fantasize about our lives constantly, as opposed to imagining our lives. Right. In imagination is rooted not in the fantasy, it's rooted in the real, but the real is really weird. Like it's beyond anything that, like, so the ideas of like monsters and our great fantasy and science fiction literature, these guys are not, they're they're talking about real things. It's just that it's not readily apparent to the way we process reality. But that's why people gobble these books up, is because they speak at a profound level.
Right. Right.
Well, that's why we say that, that reality is stranger than fiction.
Oh, totally.
Hello.
And science is getting us there. Science is beginning, you peel back like ideas of cosmic dimensionality, the idea of a multiverse, all this kind of stuff. Science is veering into the mystic. Just because there's no way that you can.
Right. Well, I'm glad you said that, because I think this is what I think like is that people don't understand, is that like a lot of this, like a lot of the scientific sort of attitude that characterizes modernity is actually, we're reaching to the point where it is going to hold us back.
Yeah.
There are things that we will not allow ourselves to see because we are stuck in a paradigm that is just too limited, that has discounted too much of the data for us to see a clearer picture of what reality actually is.
Well, science
guys,
originate in the mystic. I mean, alchemy,
yeah,
all the rest of it, right? Like,
yeah.
So
the discipline arises out of that. I mean, the difference between a scientist and a magician is a difference of degree. That's
exactly
realistically
but there is a difference between science and scientism.
Oh, totally. Well, scientism right. is an abandonment ultimately of science. It's an idolatry. Well, it's the same foreclosure, right? If real science is the spirit of discovery and being able to give more a better articulation of what is being discovered.
And in that understanding of science, theology is still also a science. And by the way, theology is also not closed. God is not
ever be.
Right, exactly.
It can't ever be.
God is not done revealing himself to us. It is not a closed system any more than science is a closed system. We are still learning about who God is and what our relationship to God is. Like, that is still unfolding.
Well, and I think that's where I think that we have to have a much broader understanding of what revelation is. Like, for the Christian, the revelation is the incarnation, right? That opens up into everything else.
That's all revelation, though, Jed. I mean,
yeah, exactly. It is.
If you realize that everything is incarnated,
yeah, then you're just discovering the how. Okay, how is this the incarnation of God? How is God incarnating and presenting himself in creation? And that's the discovery side of it. But when we look at revelation as the thing that happened back then,
right?
The thing that is we have in our holy books, and our holy books are really important. But if you're limiting your view of revelation as an event that happened once upon a time, then what you're doing is you're depersonalizing it, you're abstracting it from your real life, and that you are a part of that revelatory story. In fact, you are that revelatory story. Like Jedidiah will talk about in the some of the theosophical understandings of, like, they're talking about the coming of the Third Testament, right? What is, we have the Old Testament, the New Testament. What's the Third Testament? Well, it's the lives of the people of God. It's the lives of the people. In which God is revealed.
Said that. Right. Like, this is exactly it. The right way to see it is like, imagination is properly is that which allows you to see the real, and through that vision to begin to offer up genuine acts of creativity, which refers not only to like artistic activity, but anything you do, and ultimately your own life.
Yeah, and the world we live in today, with all of the problems that we're facing, is owing fundamentally to a lack of imagination. Right?
George, I'd be proud of you, Jed.
We cannot live in the real world until we can imagine it.
Well, eyes that see scarcity. I mean, that's like,
and all kinds of things. Like the whole idea of like greed. What are you talking about? Like, I mean, I used to work at Four Seasons, like as a room service attendant. I've served billionaires, I won't say names, but some of the most famous people in the world. And some of them are actually really cool. Some of them are, whatever. But it's like, so they've got a few more grains of sand in their ant heap on, you know, on this little tiny rock that literally, like, there's billions of light years of stuff. And it's like, are we getting into this sliding scale of like, I'm going to accumulate more stuff so I can show myself to be great and important? And it's just, it's laughable. It is fundamentally laughable, because we don't, like, until you have that iconic sense that everything is God being manifested, then it's like, it doesn't matter what the size is, what the greatness is, where it lands on a scale, because it's all, God is all in all. Until we can begin to see a world where God is all in all, we will never live in the real world. It's a failure of imagination. It's the acceptance of these fantasies that I'm better than you, I'm different than you, I'm more important than you. And that's the only way I can be important.
Right. And we won't
And
we won't be able to enter into the co-creative role that God has for us as long as we refuse that, because
in the co-creation is just bringing God forth into the world.
exactly.
You know,
In new and exciting ways.
I have a little story. So when we moved to Telegraph Creek, we bought this 30-acre piece of land with a plywood. Actually, it was OSB board. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's awful stuff, right? It's like big giant chips of sawdust glued together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on the outside and on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you open the door, this smell of pack rat, which is like just a notch below a skunk, okay? Just right in your face. And there's pee stains down the OSB, right, of the pack rats. And there's no work done on the land. There's one tap in a kitchen made of cupboards that are just 2x4s nailed together with some particle board for shelves.
Mm-hmm.
And one little tap and no toilet, just an outhouse. And we had ordered a bunch of lumber because we wanted to put some siding on for the winter, and we wanted to work on the inside during the winter. And this big load of lumber came, and this neighbor was helping us unload the lumber. And her and I were, you know, moving boards, right? And she looks at me and she goes, "You're rich." And I was like, I thought to myself, yes. And I wasn't thinking about the money I spent on the lumber. I was thinking about where I was and what God had given me. And I was, you know, when she said it, my gaze went straight to the mountains, because I was like, because there's this range right across, like, from our place that you could see, right? And I was just like, yes, I am rich, right? Like, this is mine. It's all mine. It's all a gift. And she was actually talking about the money I spent on the lumber. And I did absolutely not, you know, because when I responded to her, it was my response that confused her. And then I realized she wasn't even talking about what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and if you can,
worlds completely.
If you can look at the world in that way, right? Like, oh, I got this rad place that I can see all this stuff. Look how rich I am, right? Like, I have, you know, when I have friends who trade precious metals, you know, so they talk about the gold trade. And I'm like, man, like, I see more gold than you. I just go down to the beach and I watch the sunset in the ocean, right? And you watch all that gold, and it's all yours. It's all there for your eyes to take in, and you are participating in it. And everybody else at the beach is looking at the same thing. So it's not like there's an impoverishment or a diminishment that I get to participate in this, and so does somebody else. And I think that we've created a world where it's like, when we want to possess that, it's like, hey, I want to possess the sunset, or like turn it into an NFT and, you know, take a picture of a sunset. It's like, you own this sunset. It's like, it's dumb. It's just dumb. Like,
Well,
I don't know why we think that way. Like, other than like, you know,
well,
and
you don't own it.
Yeah, well, you're in it. It's in your head. It's in your head. And so you get to enjoy it. It's like, that's the projection that's going on in your mind, that you are taking this in, and it's not diminished because others are participating in it.
Right.
You know, it's like we're watching the same thing. I mean, I'm imagining that, like, whatever I'm seeing when I'm watching a sunset is corresponding to what somebody else is seeing. I can't know that, because I'm not in their head. But it's
Yeah.
like we get those and you're getting that sense of like wealth, like the way you're looking at wealth versus the way the question is asked, right? Well,
Yeah.
you're rich. Well,
You're
because I got
rich.
some wood, because I have some wood, and I you know, because I have a few different objects, it makes me wealthy. Like your understanding of wealth was like, oh yeah, totally. Of
Yeah,
course
I
I'm
know.
rich.
I know.
And
Like, yeah.
and I think that that's the side of it, Shari, that like we, you know, in our modern world, and I think that's what Paul talks about when he says, you know, like their foolish hearts were darkened. And well, why? Because they lost their connection with God, and they lost their connection with gratitude, and then everything falls down from there.
Yeah.
Is when we in that darkened imagination, or that fantasy world, like then it's like you're constantly grasping its scarcity, its want, it's the overweening of desire. And that's the world we live in. That's the world we've created, or the world we have. Like there's a sense, I in one of my longer form poems I wrote with this concept of the unworld. Like we live in the world and we live in the unworld, and the unworld is this fantasy that we've projected. It's a collective thing, and it has to be overcome by the world. It has to be overcome by an apocalypse, a revelation of the world itself.
Has to come crashing in.
Right.
Yeah, and that is, and the apocalypse is Calvary, is the reordering of the whole thing,
Which
because
is what it does.
subverting all of that kind of stuff.
Right. What it does is enables us to see again. Like that's specifically what it does. And there's like there is I think like there's a way in which like Christ reveals his mother in a way too. Like I see this in Sophianic terms, because it's like it opens up the potential to see the beauty in the world and the glory shining forth as it actually is. And it's been there all along. It's just that it enables us to see it. Bulgakov talks about like in his meditation on the Grail, he talks about like the water and the blood of Christ like falling to the earth, right? Which makes him present in the earth. There's like this mutual disclosure of like the Son and the Spirit, which manifest each other, which consequently manifest the Father, and we just have to have eyes to see.
And like where Bulgakov is so helpful too, is that in the Son and in Logos is manifest for Sophia's wisdom, but then in the Spirit is the glory bringer. He shows us Sophia in her radiance and in her glory, you know, and that's that Holy Spirit imagery in the New Testament, especially in the book of Revelation, right? You have these 7 lampstands that are the 7 spirits, right? But then you get into spiritual vision, is the Lamb has 7 eyes, which are the Spirit of God, right? He's seeing through the Spirit, through the glory. That is the impetus of how Christ is viewing the world, is through the Spirit. Already, that's what that at least one thing that image is telling me, is that spiritual vision is the precondition of all creation. And so like our co-creative role of like, how do we get out of the mess that we're in, is it's that return back. And so that's where like with these conversations that like John and Paul are having, and probably thousands of other conversations like that, is it's a precursor to that imaginative and creative calling that that's our birthright and our inheritance, is to be that in the world. And that's how all things get made new.
Well,
right. And I think that the idea that it's just God's just going to show up out of heaven and just fix the whole mess for us, that's like, no, that's not it.
It leaves out the 144,000 singing the new song, which is actually summoning forth the new creation towards us. It's like it's participating in that motion. Like we have a part to play in this. The Perusia is a participatory activity. It is not a spectator sport.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that like things he might not have to step in and get us out of a jam,
right?
But it's not gonna,
Well,
know,
yeah, yes. Well,
You know,
yes, I
We
have.
did that already,
Right.
right?
Right. Our technocracy definitely has us on a very dark path.
yeah,
And
and I think we can all see that. Like you look at where it's going, it's like there's not there. It's like we have, we have put ourselves on a train that seems like it only knows how to drive off a cliff. It's like
Right.
you got to get off these tracks, man. This is going. This is leading to a disaster. And
I just want to read before you guys go away from it. I want to read. I want to read a song. It's kind of my personal.
I'm going to listen and mute because I've got to. I'm in the room. I just had to take care of something here in the room
Sure.
real quick. So I'm listening.
It's just a song it's my song. It's the one that has accompanied me through my whole life. My kids all say, "Mom, sing that. Mom, sing that." I didn't write it, but it's this. Jed was talking about the gold and the difference between looking at gold for what it is and gold on the waves of the ocean. And that is, I think,
or the gold that lines the Holy of Holies that represents the uncreated light.
Yeah, it's like this is what, when my neighbor said you're rich, that's what I was looking at. I was like, yeah, right. Like, look at those look at everything that I have, all the beauty, right, that I had, that God has given. I did nothing. He made it.
Right. And it really does all belong to you, but you
And
don't own it at the same time.
No. So anyway, this song is just, I'll just read it.
That's what I was trying to talk about when I was talking about like use without possession. Like the entire world is yours for you to use and enjoy and interact with. It's all given to you.
It's the gift.
But you don't possess it.
Right.
Because it also belongs to all the other creatures that God has created.
Right. Okay, all the diamonds in this world that mean anything to me are conjured up by wind and sunlight sparkling on the sea. I ran aground in a harbor town, lost the taste of being free. Thank God he sent some gull-chased ship to carry me to sea. 2,000 years and half a world away. Dying trees still grow greener when you pray. Silver scales flash bright and fade in reeds along the shore. Like a pearl in a sea of liquid jade, his ship comes shining. Like a crystal swan in a sky of suns, his ship comes shining. And what I love about that song is all the precious stone language describing the natural world. Right. Silver scales flash bright and fade in reeds. It's a fish.
Right.
Like a pearl in a sea of liquid jade. It's just that's the real world. And yeah, that's it. I'll just say
right.
that.
Well, and I think it brought up like the encounter of Mary with Gabriel at the Annunciation, right? Or is like the structure of her language is the language of creation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is what she says here. Let me find but may it happen to me as you have said, right? And that's the structure of how God creates. Let there be.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like there's an allowance of the actualization comes through the permission. And that is the creation itself. And so let there be. And so that's why I love McCartney's let it be.
I know.
There's just
right?
like that song takes me to places that I can't even describe.
Yep.
Because it's
John Bear makes the point too that when God says let us make man in our image, the Hebrew is let us be making. It's an ongoing process, right?
Mm-hmm. It's formation. It's plaso, I think is the term in the Greek. And, you know, the Hebrew language for making and doing and creating, there's a diverse range of terms, you know, from the divine creation of bara, which is in the beginning, God created. Well, that is never talking about an ex nihilo event. It's talking about putting things in their proper order. So when David says, create in me a clean heart, O God, when David's praying that prayer, bara is the term he uses. He's asking God to create in him a clean heart. David's assuming he already has a heart. It's moved outside of the function for which it was designed. And he's asking for God to bring it back into alignment with that divine, that holiness that comes, you know, that holy of holies type concept. And so it's that creative activity that we're involved in, that the imagination is involved in, is when you see something that really is and needs to come forth into the world, our response to God is let it be this way.
Well, yeah, like that's the point Bear makes. Like when it comes to the creation of man, he doesn't say let there be. He says, let us be making. And then John Bear points out that it's up to us to say, let it be.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, Margaret Barker would point out that in that when that let us make that it is Lady Wisdom, it is the Shekhinah that is being addressed in that let us make.
Which means that
brings us back to that familial
let us
familial
make man
type.
in our image. Who's God talking to? We are in that audience. Right. Let us make, because our response is part of that making.
Right. Because we are
when we bring Mary's words, when Mary's words are our words, we have entered into the real world.
Right. This is why.
That's why also Christ is the firstborn of all creation, because Mary said, "Let it be."
Well, this is actually what I sent John an email like a couple of months or a few months back, where when he invited me to email him over like some problems that I had seen in his Discord community, and like the way I ended that email was what I said is that we have to imitate Mary as well as Christ, because in the imitation of Mary and Mary's fiat in that let it be, we create a space which is a womb in which the Son of God can be born within us. So we have to have the imitation of both.
Well, Mary is our icon of the matrix, right? The matrix is the womb or the mother. Right. And so that's kind of like where like these Matrix movies, it's like, well, you're trying to fight to break outside of the Matrix. It's like, well, if you understand what the Matrix is, you would never want to get out. You know, it's just that there's this dark fallen matrix that we exist
but
within.
That's what we're trying to make, though. That's what we're trying. This is what our technocracy is trying to actually bring into this. This is why I definitely am with you when you say there may actually be some divine intervention in time required, because we are on a path of using our fancy instead of our imagination to make the world into an anti-matrix in that true term.
Well, I mean, in the movie The Matrix, the Matrix, there is no suffering, right? There's no suffering in the Matrix. Right.
Well, they do. There is suffering because they realize people wouldn't believe it if they didn't introduce suffering.
Well,
so
that's what I'm saying. It's outside of the Matrix that you actually experience the suffering, right? If you are in that fetal position, in that thing, you're just in this. You're not being. You know, Jonathan Peugeot said something recently that really provoked something in me. I have to think about it more. But he was talking about the thorns and our bodies. And of course, you know me, Nate, like this is my thing, right? And I've said that we have these pincushion bodies, right? Like that's what they feel like to me. They're super vulnerable. Like you can poke right into them, easy. Butter knives will do it, okay? And, but Jonathan was talking about, I think it's Hindu, the world the cosmos is an egg. Yeah. Right. And it has to be penetrated in order to what was the word he used? For the multiplicity to be born. That's what it
Right.
was. And that's what the thorns represent, right? In Genesis, in the there are these. It was in his Q&A. I'm going to find the stamp for you and send it to you. The thorns represent this penetration of the body by which the multiplicity, right, can pour out into the world. It's also the piercing of the side of Christ, right, where Christ creates through the piercing. Anyways, I just listened to it the other day, but it was just like totally fascinating to me.
Well, those are really important concepts, though. Like, I mean, I think people jump to the symbol, or we're looking at the cross and like the crown of thorns. Like, that's literally the only crown that God can have in the world, right? And what the world did to him is the only thing that it can do to God when it encounters God. Like, our religions and our political arrangements are going to always view God as the threat that has to be dealt with and has to be nailed to a cross and has to be pierced, because he's so foreign. What he's introducing is so foreign to us, but it is actually the world.
Though. Yeah, but there's this. It's the process. I don't know if I can say this properly, because God knows the process, right? He knows that when he reveals himself, he will be pierced. We know that if we make ourselves vulnerable, we will be pierced. Okay, we know this, and yet it's precisely there where God is. Okay, the tabernacle represents creation. It represents creation, and God is in the midst of it. That is also what you just pointed out, the Theotokos is creation, and God is in the midst of her, right? And he is in the midst, like, I like to think about the tabernacle as a shorthand for hello, I'm here, just look around, right? I'm in creation, I'm in it, but it's hidden, right? And I'm getting way ahead of myself because I'm excited about this and I can't articulate.
Well, it's the apocalypse of Calvary, though, is that when God shows himself forth into the world in this intensely personal way, it can be no other way.
Right, but the thing is, though, it's like it's trampling death by death. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Okay?
So in showing forth the vulnerability, he shows forth the power of it.
Yeah, his strength is made perfect in weakness. Okay, so it's like he has to be pierced. The multiplicity, the multi-unity has to be revealed. Okay, because that's the pattern.
Well, that's because kenosis is required for creation to happen.
Right. That's what this is about.
And that's why that's the creation. That's that's where creation is happening. That's where John Bear brings that out in his work, is Christ is creating the cosmos from the cross.
Yeah.
Right. That is the creation. And we don't, even though it enters into our time at a different point, it's still nonetheless, it's the creation itself.
Right.
Because in our mode of consciousness, right, we build this kind of world that's a sketch, or it's scaffolding, but it's not the building itself. And we're confusing the two, one with the other. And so we have, like, that's where the idea of the archonic consciousness is, like, this is the way the world gets arranged in this set of competitions and rivalries and this this dark dialectical dualism that is manifest in division, not unity, right? Is that we eventually, like, when we encounter the real, we encounter this radical kenotic self-giving and this insistence that it is the real world, that's where the resistance point comes in, because it requires us to fundamentally question what is the nature of reality itself. Because what Christ is revealing to us is the real, and it's almost like he can't handle it. And so the response of, like, we'll lay all kinds of blame at, the foot of, the Jews of that time were on Pilate. It's like there's nothing else they could have done.
Yeah, but they didn't do anything wrong though, Jed. See, this is the thing.
No, and that's not, yeah, and I'm not saying they did it. I'm
this
saying
is trampling death by death, right? Like
they did the only thing they could do. There was no, I mean, there's a sense of like personal agency is involved there. Sure, we can talk about that. But if you just take a step back, it's the way it had to happen.
Well, and that's why I think Bear points out that when Pilate looked at Christ, he said, "Behold the man, behold the human being," because he was participating in something far greater than himself, and he recognized something that only God could recognize. Only he was looking at the finished creation when he said that, and yet it hadn't been finished yet. So think about that.
Well, and that it also in that moment it began and ended. It was beginning and end.
But it was finished because it happened before the foundation of the world.
Right?
I know.
So which is why Emil Bach to me it's obvious he has to be right in reading the lamb slain in Revelation 5 as a New Testament representation of what's happening in the heavenlies. Yes. As creation is happening on earth in the Genesis story. So it's showing the parallel. Genesis shows us what's happening in the earth as things are emerging from the earth, and then in Revelation, in the story of the Lamb slain, we see what's happening in the heavenlies, which is this transformation that happens within the divine realm of the lion into the lamb slain, which introduces the possibility of a change and evolution and becoming.
Right.
Which
and that's entering into our time from a trillion points of reference.
Yeah.
Like it's not like coming in at like we're thinking cause and effect linear time. It's like, well, no, this thing is getting penetrated from every possible direction because it's an interpenetrating reality. The lamb slain from the foundation of the world is the world. It is the creation. And like, so origin, that is how Origin's viewing it. That's how Maximus, Maximus will clean up some of Origin's maybe logical errors in terms of how he's ordering creation. But their idea that the lamb slain from the foundation of the world is the creation.
Yes.
And so everything is pre-contained within that already.
Well, even Athanasius starts there when he writes on the incarnation, he starts with the cross.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and like on the incarnation is not like a discussion, and John Barron, some of his lectures on the translation that St. Vladimir's put out, and he had like a 2-part discussion on that. Yeah. It's on YouTube. It's really good.
Yeah, I watched it.
But yeah, so you've seen it. And so like his point is that like he's arguing basically Christ's divinity from the cross. That's the whole apology of the whole on the incarnation. So if you're not seeing, it's about the cross.
And this is what I think this is precisely this is why the apostles like said that their gospel was Christ crucified.
Yes.
Like because they understood this, and I'm pretty sure like that's how they were teaching it.
Yeah. And Paul says, I refuse to know nothing among you except Christ and him crucified.
Exactly. Because that is actually everything.
Everything. Yeah. Yeah, and
then
that's why
to me,
Origin picks up on it. That's precisely why Origin goes that route.
Well, because it is the logos that contains all the logoi that has been incarnated and manifested and conquers death by death. I mean, that's
right. So bringing it back to maybe the discussion that Paul and John were having.
Good idea.
Is where do like this one? This is like the big thing I'm dealing with in my own mind right now is, okay, Christ and him crucified, right? That's what we're trying to communicate and convey, right? How do we then, in a context where let's say in the non-theism context, where's the bridge? How do we communicate that? Because I think that's what Paul's doing in his Pauline, his approach is just how do I connect this back to Jesus in some way? Because that's where this whole thing then it opens up. But unfortunately, like I can see where guys like John and others leave the Christian tradition because the very person that they're supposed to encounter is not encountered.
Right.
Something is missing.
That's right.
Well, see, this is this is from those On the Incarnation lectures.
Mhm.
I don't know if you remember when he talks about the young girl who was martyred,
Yeah, Blandina.
Blandina, and
Yeah.
and Athanasius makes this point that when those who were with her, and this turns out, or those who were watching, and this turns out to be Athanasius himself, right?
It was Irenaeus in that lecture.
Irenaeus, sorry, yeah. Sees her, he sees Christ.
Mhm.
Okay, and so this is, I think, what you're getting at, Jed, in this is the missing piece. Okay, you have to be able to look at that kind of surrender in all of its forms, okay, and see Christ. It's a kenosis, right? So
Right.
and how do you make somebody see that? I don't think you can. I think that's
well, I think that this is where, but I think that's it. This is going to sound really like woo and out there, but
Okay.
like bear with me for a second. Is I think that that's what's happening at Pentecost.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
is
yeah.
they are now speaking the universal language. I
Mhm.
can now hear in my own tongue. Like, I don't know what that whole phenomenon was, but they were tapping into, they were speaking Christ into the world in a way that people could hear.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was Pentecost. And there was this undoing of the division at Babel.
Well, and
right?
tongue in the
Is that
Greek
it's the-
refers not only to like the language, but actually the physical organ too, right? Like it's like
Right.
also literally the tongue. So like there's like there's a transformation.
Yeah, and so I'm saying, like, in a sense, like, we need to, and I'm not saying this in a, like, don't get me wrong, like, I'm not saying in the charismatic sense of speaking
No, I
in
understand.
tongues.
No,
But
I
what
didn't
I'm
think you
talking about
were.
is we need to learn to speak in tongues, right? We need to be so
Right.
connected to the outpouring of the Spirit that, like, whether we're speaking in a conversation like these kinds of conversations, or we're speaking through a work of art, or any of those kinds of things, is we have to be speaking from that universal language that then becomes intelligible.
Right. The Adamic speech that allows us to actually like fully like engage in this like theurgic activity of co-creation that we're called to. That's precisely
And
it.
I'm not denigrating the practice of speaking in tongues, by the way. Like,
Right.
as somebody who is kind of charismatic myself, like, that's
Right.
part of my practice, but I don't think that's just an approximation of
Right. I think it's
something
hinting
that's-
toward something that's bigger and deeper than that. And
totally.
And Catherine Pickstock, I think she's onto this. In After Writing, there's this really memorable section where she talks about like the words of consecration in the Latin, right? This is my body, right?
Yeah.
She says not only are they not of ambiguous meaning, but they give all other words their meaning.
Yeah.
This is to penetrate what it really means for Christ to be the Logos, and to see the possibility of joining our speech to that true power of the Logos.
Yeah. Well,
And-
and like that whole formulary of, what is it? Is it hoc est meum corpus? I forget how it goes, but this is my body, right?
Right.
But what's the end result? It's for you. This is me for you.
Right.
Yeah, but it's also, this is my body which can be pierced and which was pierced.
For you.
Yeah, but the piercing is interesting. The piercing, I need to think about this.
Well,
more.
and Mary,
This
though,
is
Mary's
really
also
my
pierced,
question.
right? Mary's also pierced. What is the word that
Yes,
Simeon speaks to her?
Yes.
Right.
So in bringing
Pierced with
God
a
into
sword.
the world,
Yeah.
we're joined in that piercing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
No,
we
there's
have to join
something
him in that
really
vulnerability.
important about this piercing thing.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it's not like, I mean, like, from our vantage point, to be pierced is painful and traumatic, right? But it's also like, it's not, the things that pierce us are not, I'm not going to go out and call it something evil good, right? Putting Jesus on the cross was an evil thing, but there was something good that was always right there behind that was the actual thing, what was actually going on.
Well,
and it's
just a little bit of a, Jess and I have been talking about the right and the left hand of God, and that's also a very interesting concept.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Right. And the left hand is like it's always the more interesting, always the more
it's good.
creative and subversive. And there's almost this antinomic wild character to it all. That's like, you think you know what I'm showing you, but let me clue you in on what is really going on here. And so it's like we get that picture of God, of right-handed power, of the bearded dude on the throne kind of
Well,
thing.
Job is all about, it's all about that, right? The book of Job.
Right. And it's like, oh, but there's something infinitely more tender going on underneath that whole story, infinitely more giving and warm. And, it's like we have this picture of God that it comes from our scriptures, right? But it's like God's like throwing them a curveball, when he brings, it's like they've been getting fastballs and that's all they can see. And then all of a sudden that slow winding curve loops over the plate. And you don't know what to do with it.
Right. Yeah, that's what I call the wrenches.
Yeah.
God loves throwing wrenches.
Yeah, I think that like there's almost like there's like toward the end, like I think we're getting close to needing to wrap up, but but I think that there's another conversation to be had here. I think if you guys are interested in doing a second part, because I think we're just starting to flirt with like these issues of like hierarchy and authority, and how to make sense of them in a Christian context, and what we're talking, and how does what we're talking about relate to that.
Okay.
So maybe we could have a follow-up conversation. I don't know if we could tie this to this might just have veered off in its own direction. I don't think we can tie that to the original conversation we were springboarding off of. But does anybody have any like last thoughts in the context of this one though?
All good.
No, I think that a lot of this is really like kind of sophiology in action. Right. And so for those that are kind of tuning in, like to these conversations, like, reading up and understanding that language, it's kind of the way it's been developed, in the last 100 years is really kind of new. And so a lot of people like, it's a language worth learning is what I would encourage people, is learn the language of Sophia and, Bulgakov or Michael Martin. And, there's a lot of great places to go to begin to acquire that language, because I think
Martin is a good gateway that I recommend to people, because he's very accessible. And I also like the fact that like he's bringing in a broader range of sociological thinking than like especially like just the Russian. I mean, if you want to get deep into it, for sure you need to read the Russians. But Michael Martin is a great entry point, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, because it's as deep as you want to take it.
Yeah.
But like being able to deal in those categories in terms of like advancing these kinds of conversations, I could imagine where that conversation would have gone, had John and Paul been conversant in some more of the sociological language. Because even if John wanted
John's going to be talking to Michael Martin soon, thanks to me.
Yeah,
so.
even if he wants to approach it, wants to approach it from his non-theism, understanding that language, it's going to build a lot of bridges in terms of how.
For sure.
Discuss.
So, just a quick question before you go would you equate John's non-theism to non-dualism? Like, is it just?
Oh yeah. Like, he's definitely a non-dualist.
Yeah, like to me, when he talked about theism, he was kind of pushing it back on the dualistic nature of it.
Oh, he's for sure a non-dualist. That's why he hates Descartes so much.
Yeah.
Right. And so to me, but to me, his description of non-theism is basically, he's talking about non-dualism, but he's not talking about, maybe he's not using that terminology because
I think
he's got a reputation.
I think he's informed by Neoplatonism, Taoism, and Buddhism.
Yeah.
So
and I think it's just when you're dealing in the kind of monisms like they're all helpful to deal with, you know, because like they're pretty much bound by a fairly common set of assumptions, right? Whether it's a Christian kind of monism or a Buddhist kind of monism or a Hindu or, you know, Zen, like there's a way of looking at these things where like you can begin to intuit like, okay, here's the similarities in what we're talking about, obviously with differences. But, you know, I think that that's kind of my first introduction to John's thought. So I find it really fascinating. I find that like to me, like what is encouraging about hearing people talk at that level is that I feel like we're starting to see people asking the right questions.
Right. And he's a scientist who's asking the right questions.
Right.
Which
is what's really important.
That's important. That's very important. Yeah, exactly.
Because it's like we can't like we need that rigorous scientist mind in the kind of problems we're confronting today.
Yes,
but it
we
can't
do.
be from a scientific standpoint, right?
That's Barfield's whole point, right? Like it has
because
to be
it's like that's the stuff that is also destroying our world and piling it up with the very things that are, you know, like killing our environment. We're doing that with our science.
Oh yeah, there's to me it's like sociology is definitely, which it's funny, Michael Martin remarked that people have called him an ecologist. Well, but he's really a sociologist. But he gets called an ecologist because of his sociology, because there's like that inevitably flows out of a sociological worldview. It's just like a natural, like, well, duh, like but it's not like, it's not ideologically ecological though. It naturally flows from it.
It's a way of seeing the world, like
right. Seeing is the key.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. This is a really great conversation. I appreciate you joining me this morning. And I think that we might need to do a part 2 on some parallel issues.
Sure.
All right. Thanks.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.